online typically spend 30 seconds a day. A shocking result which I found. We've got to check it out whether it's generally applicable or just came out in this particular survey. But that's the kind of problem. You do not engage with news in the way your predecessors in the previous generation would have. And that's a problem. You do various other things on social media, not just follow news. And the terms used by scholars is snacking and snacking and scrolling the news.
I'm going to disagree because I think young people do read the news and are interested in the news, but is the news also looking at young people's concerns? I mean, it's a both chicken and egg situation. So whether young people are reading news and whether the news is catering to their interests and their issues as well. I want Pankaj to take that.
I think that's a good point, whether media are being relevant to young people, whether they're engaging them, because you've got to engage the audience. Are you being relevant? Are you doing your job? Or is it beyond your control? Is it the case that whatever you do, you have no chance in that ecosystem? I don't know. But that's a good question.
Yeah, Mr. Ram, you as a senior journalist, as an editor, and going back, I'm just thinking if you were to go back today, 20 years, as so active in journalism, and more than that, because also on what is news, what is journalism, you have thought about that and you've written a lot. Would you have in your wildest of imaginations thought that in 2018 we would be having conversations of this kind around news, around journalism? And what were the concerns, say 15 or 20 years ago, regarding the future of news and journalism then? And perhaps if you were to look into the crystal ball now, some of these changes in technology have not been actually imagined by anybody. But is there some way to, with your background and interest and understanding, is there something that can perhaps be seen in the future as well? But what were the nature of discussions and concerns 15, 20 years ago in journalism?
Good question. I think journalists typically don't look too far ahead, or many of us didn't. But what we thought we are on a good wicket. I remember what happened during the emergency. I was fortunately out of the media system at that point. It's completely not only censored, but it was a disgraceful, shameful period for the Indian newspaper industry as a whole. There's no, television was only a small part of the picture at that point. But what came out after the emergency was very promising. It was, I think somebody mentioned this morning, and there was a way of there was a lot of bottled up energy. I think that's my understanding of it, that came out. It had been suppressed during the emergency, and there are so many bad things happened there that I think journalism was very energetic as it emerged. I'm talking about the period 1975 to 77 was the emergency, and soon after that, there was also a tremendous development of Indian language journalism post-emergency, particularly the Hindi language press. And at that time, we had a very idealistic notion of journalism that you serve the public interest. You could make a big name as an investigative journalist. The environment was very congenial. There were very few restrictions on what you could do. I was involved in the Bofors investigation, which came later, in the late 80s, specifically between 1987 and 1990. And although a lot was written about the government's intolerance and the risks and so on, we faced absolutely no hardship of any kind. To the credit of the Rajiv Gandhi government, I must acknowledge this, I don't think they did anything that harmed us in any way. They wouldn't give the Hindu advertising. That's all right, fair enough. If you put out material that damages the government so badly, then I don't want, I don't complain. I don't cry when they say no ads for you and so on. And they don't do it too openly either. But other than that, absolutely no problem. Today, you see what I mentioned, ABP News. I mentioned the killings. If you look at world rankings of the Indian press today, India, according to the to a survey done by the Reporters Without Frontiers, which is an independent organization based in France and now internationally accepted. We rank 138 in a list of about 185, and 75% of the countries of the world have a higher press freedom ranking than you, one. There are other rankings as well where India figures very low. But that's not all. There is an organization called Committee to Protect Journalists, and India is a permanent member of a club, it's called the Global Impunity Index. Journalists get killed, but not in a single case do they deliver justice. And this has been measured from 1992. If I remember right, about 48 journalists were killed and 30-odd murdered in the course of their work. Not a single case has been resolved so far in the Indian system. And so that's the definition for club membership, something we can call a club of shame. There are 12 countries in the world where journalists are killed and there's no justice rendered, that is in the final stage. And India has been, from the beginning, a member of this club of shame. At the same time, there is space out there for dissent, to express different opinions. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking here about all this. So it's hard to get a fix on it. But in answer to your question, I know I've been dodging it. We did not foresee what was out there. We could not have imagined the internet. We could not have imagined that there would be Facebook or Google or Amazon, WhatsApp, YouTube, and so on. Nobody, not just me, nobody anywhere had an idea of this. If you did, you were crazy. And today, I think, to predict the future, I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't hazard it. There are views that say that they will find a business model for journalism and journalism will flourish, but very few people actually believe it. There is no viable business model for journalism today. That's a fact. You have the New York Times, you have the Economist, you have the Times of India and India. India still sees some growth, but how long is it going to last? And I have something to say on this. How long do we have for growth? Newspapers, printed newspapers. They're still growing, particularly in Indian languages. And Alan Rusbridger, whom I mentioned before, was quoted as saying that journalism is changing at the speed of light. The speed of light is nearly 300,000 kilometers per second. And he said that every day, virtually every day, we are learning new techniques and fresh ways about the way digital technologies are transforming the media. We say that in India, journalism is changing not at the speed of light, but at the speed of sound, which is 342 meters per second. In other words, we are in some kind of denial. Indian reports say that some research says that we have time till 2040 before what has happened in mature media markets or developed countries will happen here. I don't believe that for a moment, because we have nearly 500 million internet users, most of them on mobile platforms, mobile phones. And do they really engage with the news? Do they really read news as we expect them to? I don't think so. So there is no business model right now. More and more people are reading news in snacking and scrolling, but there's no revenue model there, because the well-known revenue model was advertising-led. We believed we offered customers to the advertising, to those who advertised. We sold people, we sold our readers to the advertisers. And that's what financed our journalism. Today, that has collapsed in developed media markets. It's declining even in India. So far as newspapers are concerned, something else has to replace it. The way the New York Times is trying to do it is put their content behind a paywall, because they don't get advertising, because what Google gets the most, Facebook and the others. So they're trying to price their product, and this is the real test. Will people buy you when they have to pay for it? pay for it in real terms. Not 1 rupee for a 16-page newspaper, but 5 rupees or 10 rupees. The New York Times is trying to do it, but it's the exception. The Wall Street Journal maybe, the Financial Times. And in India, of course, there's still examples of profitable media organizations. But how long is it going to last when the model is under assault, has collapsed in many places, is under assault here? I don't have an answer to this question unless you believe piously that people will want information. Democracy cannot flourish without information, and somehow we'll find a way, magically at some point. Right now, journalism, the spirits are very low in most parts of the world, and we have to work hard, the way Alan Rusbridger advocates in his book. We've got to work very hard to redefine the purpose of journalism and to establish our relevance and even centrality in people's lives. Not that it's going to go away, but if it's in decline, the economics of it is in poor shape, I think you're not going to have very good journalism.
No, but then our model was flawed because, as you said, we were depending on advertisers all the time. I mean, India always had 80% of your newspaper dependent on advertising, while in the rest of the world, about 20% they depended on advertising, and the rest is what the reader paid. So the point is that we've never engaged with readers and viewers and asked them to pay for news, or we're going to tell them you're going to get the media you deserve. If you are not going to pay for it, an advertiser is going to pay for it, and then you get certain kinds of news, and certain kinds of news you won't get. So you have to start paying for that news gathering. You have to start paying. So this is the thing, going to readers actually and saying that if you want a free press, you want a vibrant press, which gets you the news you need and you want, you'll have to probably pay for it. Because we've had a flawed model from the beginning. This over-dependence on advertising was bound to collapse, and that advertising will go to someone else. It's going to Google now. So I think we need to rethink this, and readers and viewers are part of that debate. They can't keep themselves out there and comment on the media and think that they're not a part of it. They have to start saying, I'm going to pay for the news I want to see. I want to see this kind of investigation, and I want to put in 2 rupees a month or whatever it works out. The Guardian's been trying it, and different papers have been trying different models. We need to experiment now with that. Whether it works fully, we don't know. But
Samira, if I may touch upon, if I may just add to this. This whole idea, our idea that independence of the press, this has to be questioned because it's been dependent on advertising, advertisers and so on. So it's a relative independence, if you want to call it that. But this myth that we are the fourth estate, as important, the other 3 estates are variously defined in different contexts. But whatever it is, the idea that we are a fourth estate is a myth. We have always been dependent. This myth of independence is only relatively true, that I'm not doing propaganda for the government or for the opposition party. I'm willing to listen to different sides. I'm trying to find the truth. I have certain professional standards. I have my values. All this works. It's good. But it's only relative. And the idea that we are absolutely independent has never been true. But today, the relative independence has come under even greater pressure. Commercial pressure, economic pressure. You're welcome. But you see the results, the lynchings, the idea, the WhatsApp messages, about child kidnappings. These false news has led to the killing of 24 innocent people. This has been reported in the press. Even the government has taken it up with WhatsApp, that anyone can put out the news that there's a child kidnapping here and innocent people, particularly women, have been murdered. Please, let me finish. Witch hunts are enabled by this. This is also part of the picture we are talking about. Empowerment, yes. If people feel empowered, to express their ideas, to express their criticism, it's very good. But you have to look at the total picture. And right now, the debate is being dominated by those who are very concerned about false news, fake news, toxic messages, polarizing messages, negative things that get amplified on the social media platforms, and so on. So you've got to make your own judgment. And I'm glad you have a different opinion on this. you see some bright spots in what's happening today. Good.
With empowerment, will you take responsibility?
It's a message, but it's called the chilling effect. It's a totality of restrictions on you, the laws, the intimidating environment created by majoritarian communalism, coming right from the top, the kind of threats that are issued, the killings which I referred to, which have gone on for quite a while, but now over the last decade they've increased. More than 10 journalists have been killed over the last decade with no accountability of any kind, often being covered up by the police or the local authorities. But I fully agree with you that many of the major media organizations, and here I would include the Hindu in this list, have failed to pick up worthwhile stories. What you referred to, the caravan story, I guess this was on Justice Lawyer. It's not that media people are scared of writing about judges. They've often done that in the past. We are quite skilled at avoiding contempt of court and and covering quite robustly wrongdoings in the judiciary. But it's, I think, something else. And I think on the Justice Lawyer, as well as not picking up on the significance of the Cobra Post revelations, I think the major media organizations, virtually all of us who claim to be major or mainstream, fail because of this climate of fear and uncertainty that has been created. And I think that's a function of politics. What's happening in the country, the kind of intimidation that we have seen. I think we started out on a very good note this morning, this idea of fear. Fear, that's also the title of Bob Woodward's new book, The Trump White House. But the idea that there's a mood of fear in this country, we are functioning under that, often self-invite. Thank you for that question.
Hello.
Your comment.
Hello. Do you think the Indian vernacular, the newspapers, the Hindi, all of them, they sensitize, they put up stories which are more saleable because of the media, or do you think they really do a good job? Because of the social media, are they under pressure to sensitize it, to make it sound more selling?
Yes, absolutely, because you are asked to get more likes. Samira referred to journalists.
The phenomenon of clickbait journalism.
Appeal to their emotions. You know what, and the big internet giants have taught you that. Their algorithms are designed to, amplify that and to make them huge forces, go viral, and so on. I think, and that's what journalists are also taught. This is why Alan Rusbridger and others have said there's no consensus on what journalism is, what the purposes of journalism are, and so on. It's always been that, but now it's much more prominent. The divides. Press. Of course, we ought to have made more of this, or more fuss about it, if you like. Make it a more important issue. But this issue has gained a certain prominence, apart from the CPJ's work. The UN General Assembly has passed resolutions on it, and so on. So it's not that this is an invisible or low-key issue. It's quite a major issue that journalists are familiar with in India. But the problem is, it's the system, it's the criminal justice system and the political system that really is behind this culture of impunity, which this index talks about, the Global Impunity Index. And the courts, the failure of the courts to deliver justice, because some of these cases have gone on for a very long time, since 1992. And the cruel statistic is, in not a single case has justice been delivered at the final stage out of in these cases. Also, there's an Indian website, Hoot, that documents these killings.
And Hoot's just closed down, unfortunately. So.
as the lady points out, it's a social issue, and how can social progress or reform happen is the comment. Yes, it speaks to the wider issues, the politics.
But also the media politics itself. In the sense, here, don't you think there's also, besides fear, there's also a sense of competition between media organizations? So if someone's doing a scoop, the others tend to ignore it. And that's been happening for a long while, as if nothing's really happened. And that has been also counterproductive to big stories, number one. Number two, the advertising model has also changed. We're not really relying on advertising as much as we're also relying on our conclaves, where we want the ministers and our prime ministers and our chief ministers to be there. So in case we want them there,